the same grace that God has given you. What is that, Bishop? What is that grace, Bishop?
Good morning. We praise God today for his presence in this place. I will be sharing today from the subject, God is able because God is faithful. Daryl already opened us in prayer. Yes. And it was the one I was going to pray. So praise God. We'll just say, God, thank you for the word. Thank you for the ability and the opportunity to hear it and to be in your midst this day. The Old Testament passage from our lectionary this week is the conclusion of the story of Joseph and his brothers. It's a beautiful passage of reconciliation. But in order to have a reconciliation, there has to have been a division and a conflict. The story of Joseph begins in Genesis chapter 37, right after the story of his father, Jacob, which is its own tumultuous story that I invite you to take a read because it will enlighten you greatly. Now, Joseph was the favored son of Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel by God. And Jacob's sons would become the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob favored Joseph because Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel, see, that's where you need to go back. The favorite wife, so much in there. But his favorite wife, Rachel, gave birth to Joseph in Jacob's old age. Rachel also gave birth to his brother Benjamin, but died during that birth. So Jacob clung tightly to Joseph and his brother as they were all he had left of Rachel. Jacob so loved Joseph that he made a multicolored coat for him. Yes, this is that Joseph, popularized by the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Because of Jacob's favoritism, Joseph's brothers hated Joseph. It didn't help that Joseph did not always have to do the work that his brothers had to do, and that he frequently told his brothers about dreams he had. God-given dreams that depicted Joseph's brothers, and in one case, his father and mother, bowing down to Joseph. So most of Joseph's brothers wanted him dead. So one day when Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, they saw him approaching and they planned to kill him. But one brother, Reuben, intervened and suggested that rather than shed his blood, they should throw Joseph into a cistern because Reuben intended to go back and get his brother later. Now, a cistern at this time was an artificial reservoir that was dug into the earth or sometimes carved into rock for collecting and storing water. This region has long dry seasons with relatively few natural springs, so catching winter rain in cisterns was very important. But our passage makes a keynote, and if we're not reading closely, we might miss it. Genesis chapter 37, verse 24 reads, "And they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it." So even in the pit, there was God's provision. Had there been water in that cistern, Joseph might have drowned. But no, there was no water in it. Can you imagine going about your life thinking that everything is fine, and suddenly you find yourself tossed into a pit? Yes, I think we all can. The grief of a sudden loss, through the passing of a loved one or a broken relationship, an illness, whether it's acute or chronic, the fear and destabilization of financial challenges, the uncertainty of a job loss, the darkness of depression, and the many other traumas of life. Yes, we've all been in the pit before. Those pits could have been the end of our stories, just like that cistern could have been the end of Joseph's story. But praise God, there was no water in it. Even in the pit, we find God's provision. With Joseph in the cistern, their brother Judah suggested that they sell Joseph into slavery. The brothers were in agreement, so they sold Joseph and he was taken to Egypt. Now, once in Egypt, Joseph was sold to one of Pharaoh's officials named Potiphar. Joseph worked well for Potiphar, and Potiphar trusted Joseph. Unfortunately, Potiphar's wife tried to get Joseph to sleep with her, and when Joseph refused, she claimed that he had attempted to rape her. Potiphar immediately had Joseph jailed. I'm sure Joseph had to be wondering what God was doing. If God had given him those dreams, how could he find himself sold by his brothers who despised him and now falsely accused and imprisoned? Would God really fulfill those dreams? If so, how in the world could he get there from here? But notice, even though Joseph is in prison, he's in the palace. Could Joseph see how God was using his painful circumstances to move Joseph into position? Can we, when we are faced with hardship and difficulty after difficulty seems to pile on one thing after another, are we able to see God's hand? And can we even imagine what God is moving us in position to do? In jail, Joseph found favor with the warden and was put in charge of the prison. When the king's baker and cupbearer were sent to prison, they became friends with Joseph. The two men each had a dream, which Joseph interpreted. The cupbearer's dream indicated that he would be restored to his position, but the baker's dream indicated that he would be killed. When Joseph's interpretations proved true, he asked the cupbearer to remember him before the king. But it wasn't until 2 years later, when the king himself had dreams that he didn't understand, that the cupbearer remembered his friend and recommended Joseph to the king. Joseph interpreted the king's dreams to mean that there would be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph went even further to recommend that the king appoint someone to collect 1/5 of the harvest during the years of plenty in order to sustain them through the years of famine. The king found Joseph to be wise and made him governor, not only to prepare for the famine, but in charge of everything in the palace. God was moving Joseph into position. When the famine came, Joseph's family was hit hard. Eventually, after hearing that Egypt was selling grain from its reserves, Joseph's father sent his brothers to Egypt to bring back food. But Jacob, believing that Joseph's younger brother was his only living son from Rachel, did not allow Benjamin to go to Egypt with the others. Now, everyone buying grain had to go before Joseph. And when his brothers came before him, not recognizing him, they bowed down, fulfilling the dreams God had given Joseph years prior. Joseph recognized them immediately, but he did not reveal himself. He did give his brothers some grain, but he put them through some pretty stressful situations before demanding that they return with Benjamin, while Joseph held his brother Simeon as ransom. When the released brothers returned home and told their father of the governor's demand, remember, they didn't know it was Joseph. Jacob still did not want to let Benjamin go. But when they ran out of food again, Jacob allowed them to take Benjamin with them to get more grain. Finally, after seeing Benjamin, Joseph revealed himself to his brothers in the passage that Brother Dale read today, and he forgave them, telling them that God had used their evil act to save them. Did you catch that? This is what God had moved Joseph into position to do, to bless his brothers who had wanted to kill him. Yes, it's true that they had bowed down before Joseph as he had seen in his dreams, but the purpose wasn't so that he could lord over them, but so that he could give them life. Sometimes God moves us into positions of authority so that through us, God can bless the very ones who desired our downfall. Joseph represents each of us. We are each the favored child of God, receiving God's outlandish love, blessings, and grace despite our faults and failings. We are also Joseph's brothers, sometimes jealous of the gifts we see in others when we can't see the gifts God has given us. And like them, we are recipients of God's crazy grace that seeks to use our own sin to save us. We are the ones who, by our rebellion, unfaithfulness, and sinful nature, crucify Christ anew, only for him to use that death to give us life. The story of Joseph, like all biblical stories, is really about God's faithfulness to an unfaithful people. These stories remind us that God continues to show up and show out, though we could never deserve that kind of love. God is able to keep God's promises because God is faithful to give love and be love at all times and in all circumstances. No matter what life throws at us, God is faithful. Exceedingly, abundantly, above all you could ask or think, according to the power that worketh in you. Oh, God is able to do just what he said he would do. He's gonna fulfill every promise to you. Don't give up on God, 'cause he won't give up on you. No, don't give up on God, 'cause he won't give up on you. No, don't give up on God, 'cause he won't give up on you. He's able. Now, if you are here today and you don't know this faithfully gracious God who through Jesus withstood all of the ugliness of humanity so that you can have life, I invite you to come to the altar. If you are on Zoom or watching on Facebook and you want to give your life to Christ, please put your name and some contact information in the chat, and we will reach out to you. If you'd like to thank God for God's faithfulness and give those things to God that make it hard for you to see God's goodness, you are welcome to come to the altar or to pray with us from where you are. Amen. Let the church say amen. Amen.